Hello, welcome to today's show. I'm Jacqueline Stockwell, CEO and founder at Leadership Through Data. I inspire and motivate information leaders across the world.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm joined today by Chirag Patel. Now, he is a London-based independent consultant and Microsoft MVP. He's also a trainer for Leadership Through Data. Now, Chirag has spent 25 years at the forefront of technology, from database development to cloud architecture. Through his business, Patel Consultants and Consulting, Chirag helps organizations master Microsoft 365 using Purview and generative AI. He is a hands-on problem solver who balances high-level solution architecture with deep technical training to ensure teams can actually use the tools that they deploy. Now, Chirag's goal is to bridge the gap between complex technology and real-world productivity. He's on a mission to ensure that organizations adopt AI, they do so with a foundation that is secure, compliant, and built to scale. Now, Chirag, I am thrilled to have you on the show today. So, Chirag, tell me how you got tell me how you became a Microsoft MVP.
Yeah, sure. Well, look, first of all, thanks for having me. Great to be here. The Microsoft MVP, a program which has been going on for many, many years. I've been part of it for now, 6 years? And time's kind of really flown by. But it's a great program to be in, to be able to help out Microsoft in their products developments, and obviously the main part is about the community. So I speak at various community events in and around UK, various parts of the world as well. So Microsoft 365 and Teams is my categories within MVP program that I kind of dive into those technologies.
It's your bag, baby, as they say. That's your bag.
Yes, I mean there's a lot more. I think the Microsoft 365 is getting bigger, so yeah, I mean the bag is getting bigger.
Much bigger, much bigger. So you focus on secure and compliant collaboration. And I want to talk about Microsoft and information management. So how does an information manager move from being a cost center to an information, and I call them entrepreneurs, but they're normally called entrepreneurs, who can create value for the business?
Yeah, I mean, great question. I mean, I think sometimes there's tendency, isn't there, to just be more technical oriented and focused, as opposed to almost thinking outside of the box from a business perspective. I think the answer to that particular question, I think there's a lot of answers to it. I think that sometimes you got to think about how not to be too reactive about the situations that you're in, but try and sort of dig out the insights from the compliance perspective to try and sort of somehow map to your business scenarios. So whether that's the revenues, or whether you're kind of satisfying all the customer service calls, insights, whatever it is, right? Try and map across those areas so you can try and at least be mindful from a business point of view.
Yeah, brilliant. And it's not saying Microsoft 365 is the answer to everything. Here, install it, is it? So you've got to kind of think about all the other security and compliance that comes with it. And I also do think it's around information leaders selling themselves and also having the power and the confidence to actually say, this is the value for the business, this is the ROI, and talking in simple language so it can connect to their emotional core using storytelling rather than the big technical jargon that you understand that sometimes I get, but sometimes I need it to be explained. And it's just how you can move those things within the organization.
Right, and I think part of that is also to form sort of key relationships with the businesses. What is it that they're doing? What is it that's kind of working for them? What are the pain points that you can try and turn into productivity areas. So all those things helps to build you in your insights for it. So yeah, absolutely, those things really help.
Amazing. And you've got 25 years in the field. So what is the biggest information issue that you've seen organizations accumulate today that they haven't been aware of in the Microsoft 365 space?
It is a long time, isn't it? I mean, I think 25 years and kind of talking about it in, especially with SharePoint, right? So I've been working since what 2002 now, and in fact, this year is SharePoint's 25th birthday, right? So that's happening out M365 conference in Orlando, so which is the conference I'm going to be speaking at as well. So looking forward to the celebrations. But yeah, I mean that's obviously just slightly we digress. But I think the biggest problem we have is the files exists in these environments, and sometimes we don't know who the owners are of these files. What is the life of these files? Because by default, everything is permanent in your SharePoint environment. So you have those issues, and then you've also got the areas of metadata, information about your files. So that's not being captured sometimes. So you really are left with a problem to try and work with, if it's relevant to have those files, or should we delete it as a cleanup and all those things. So I think to add the context is very important about the files that you store in your environment.
Amazing, amazing. So let's talk about AI. Let's talk a bit about Copilot. So from a Purview and SharePoint perspective, what happens if an organization is AI ready but not compliant ready?
Yeah, I mean, it's the kind of area for a lot of organizations, because I think pretty much everybody's AI ready, right? In the sense that not just from a data point of view, but if you got all the tools that you need, whether that's ChatGPT or even Copilot Personal, or the Copilot Chat or for work, it's kind of there. You can use it. Okay, unless you haven't got the license, then you can't use the work part. But I think the biggest area from compliance point of view is, and it's kind of slightly going back to the previous question, that if you got all the content, all the files stored in your environment, you don't know if they're going to give you, if Copilot is going to give you all the right answers, because some of those answers could be out of date. And especially if you're not classifying or protecting, your files, so you don't know how sensitive the content will be. So pretty much all those things will start to surface when you try and run Copilot to these things, because Copilot, just same as your user level permissions, is going to have access to all those things. Of course, it honors the security. So if it doesn't have access, what you don't have access to, it's not going to go and look for that. So from that point of view, I think sensitivity of your files is very important, because you don't want that to just leak out. Because if anything, Copilot is now going to race ahead and get all the content you need, more than what search will give you.
Amazing. Thank you. So let's talk about SharePoint Premium. So you've delivered some of Leadership Through Data SharePoint Premium training courses. Can you just explain to the listeners what it is and how it works?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, SharePoint Premium, I think the name's kind of gone away or going away. I think it's now all about document processing capability, if you like. It is, as you say, it is a premium feature. It's obviously an add-on licenses to it, and there's flexibility on that. But for me, the biggest advantage for SharePoint Premium is the fact that you're able to kind of, assemble your files from, various metadata pieces that you might collect, whether that's your statement of works, whether that's particular contract. You're able to kind of synthesize that content through various pieces of metadata, but also looking at the other way as well, that you can actually capture the key metadata from your various files. So you can go to the other way as well to try and give more context about your files through the use of metadata, bulk editing, and all these capabilities. And the final point on that is that you're able to add your compliance layer too. So you can add sensitivity labels, you can have your retention labels, part of the model that exists within SharePoint Premium, so that when you're creating all these documents, then they can also be incorporated with those compliance labels. So to me, that's a very an area that if you're working with a lot of files, it will make your life easier for sure, and obviously, save the long-term costs.
Long-term costs, yeah. So it's a bit like an umbrella then. So you're putting an umbrella, safety protective umbrella over the top using SharePoint Premium to attach to all the things that you've described.
Yeah.
Is that correct in my analogy assumption there?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you're kind of giving that more kind of that large scale work that you normally do. I mean, because if you don't do those sort of things, you might just work with your daily regular files that you do, and you could almost just capture metadata almost manually if we take the contracts, for example. So the automation is the key with the SharePoint Premium. It can that can do it for you without you even knowing it, because it's very much based on the model that you design, which is very simple. There's no code involved, and it's literally just fill in the blanks for what the model you want to be able to create.
You make it sound so easy, but
It is. It is. Trust me.
love that. I love that. So many organizations still treat SharePoint as a filing cabinet. How does SharePoint Premium change the return of investment of information by turning unstructured files into structured assets?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think sometimes it's the lack of knowledge that really gives us rise to these scenarios in which we tend to classify it as a dumping ground, isn't it, for the files. So I think from that perspective, I mean, it's kind of going back that if you don't provide enough context around, probably just repeating partly from the previous questions, that if you don't capture those key metadata and not give enough context, then for sure, even for your AI capabilities, you're going to struggle with that, because you want to be able to get the accurate responses and the insights you get from the Copilot. So SharePoint Premium will help you at least get there to an extent in which you can start to capture all these things. I mean, I think the other part as well is that if you got like any receipts, invoices, or any kind of structured data, then those things are also included as part of that models that you define to be able to create all those automated solutions to be able to accelerate your content management.
Amazing. So let's talk a bit more about metadata. So a common mistake is thinking AI will fix poor metadata automatically. What foundational work must an organization, an information manager do before SharePoint Premium can actually work that magic?
Yeah, I mean, the common answer here that's recurring is, of course, metadata, isn't it? Again, yet again, we are, right? So it's an answer to a lot of the questions, and I say that because in this particular case, when we want to try and fix, you got to have some kind of a schema, right? You got to have what we call the taxonomy. That taxonomy capability in SharePoint has been there pretty much since day one, right? What we call the term store, for example. So if you've got already that investment where you're looking after your term store values in which you're populating your document metadata across your SharePoint document libraries, then you're kind of almost there, except you might need to clean up if there are things in there which you're not using it anymore, right? So that's the first part from your metadata. So we call that structured metadata. So everybody in the organization kind of benefits. The second part is the permissions. Historically, Microsoft have made it very easy for us to be able to share our files to internal or external users if that's enabled. But sometimes these are permissions that's been overshared, for example, or maybe they've just been left there for permanent access by somebody. So you want to try and tighten those things, and there are various tools to help you do that, such as the SharePoint Advanced Management, which is a kind of part of your Microsoft 365 Copilot. So there you can run various kind of reports to be able to fix those permissions. And then the other one I see is the labeling from a compliance point of view. A lot of organizations, they use data loss prevention. Some probably are trying out maybe sensitivity labels. I know that's been matured as well, so I'm sure a lot of organizations are using it. But I see some organizations where they've not got that implemented. So you want to try and get up to that quickly as possible to be able to try and at least classify what should be available for Copilot and shouldn't be. So that will help you from that classification point.
Amazing, amazing. So can you share a story for me where SharePoint Premium has saved an organization from a massive manual sort of data tagging nightmare, as some of their information leaders come across?
Yeah, it's the contracts. I will use, especially with the public sector organizations, when you're working with huge volumes of data, where in actual fact, some of this data is just stored in plain ordinary folders, and they got good sort of housekeeping, if you like, where the contracts are stored and everything else. But a lot of that is very manual. There are a lot of kind of workflows built around it to be able to try and, kind of help meet their needs to be able to search and so forth. SharePoint Premium comes along where you have particular kind of templates, that you basically using it and be able to sort of drive that to be able to extract your key data items within your contracts to be able to kind of suffice to populate all your various metadata within your SharePoint document library. So from there, what you're able to do then is obviously you can do your usual kind of sorting, filtering, and so on for various types of data you have extracted from your contracts. But also you're helping with the search experiences too. And in one example where I've kind of built the search kind of experiences in terms of the refiners, for example. So you're able to search for them those contracts by various filters within the search results. So you can do all those clever things once you've got that key metadata extracted from the contract. So yeah, that's the example of the story, I would say, that's been most beneficial.
Amazing, amazing. So I'm going to now take you to looking at some practical advice and some pitfalls. So can you give the audience some actionable takeaways from today's session? So if you tell me what we've discussed today and give them some practical takeaways that they can implement straight away.
Yeah, absolutely. I think firstly, definitely read up on the document processing, because there are various capability, and there's, I should say, various feature sets within that SharePoint Premium brackets document processing. So definitely look at those things, where you have the various auto metadata and all the other refiners that you can use to try and read up on that. But also Microsoft provides lots and lots of good videos and Microsoft Mechanics, for example, one of the YouTube channel. That's probably one of the key areas to look for. But also look through your own environment, which area of the work is costing you more time and effort, something that's more repetitive, try and identify those so that you can at least look into SharePoint Premium, and of course then, look into your further work within the AI side of things. Also maybe, try out Copilot, even if you want to try it out on one SharePoint site, for example, and be able to put your various sensitive data as a test and to see what sort of things you're getting it out. Try and test some of those things out before you go full scale implementing some of the compliance efficiencies you have. So that would be my biggest takeaways from this. But also at the same time, follow the community, various good examples out there as well, and just search for MVP communities and you will see lots of practical examples there.
Beautiful, beautiful. And Leadership Through Data also do our quarterly catch-ups, which take all the new features into a webinar. So it's a subscription-based service. So if you didn't want to do all the lovely stuff that you could do, you can head over to the website and carry on with those. Now, one thing you talked earlier about SharePoint Premium being a premium, so it's an add-on. What suggestions can you give listeners who want to build a business case to their leaderships that proves these tools pay for themselves? So getting a business case through the board, what would you suggest that they put in that?
Yeah, I think it takes a lot of convincing, doesn't it, to try and get that budget right. I think a lot of the time, I spend a lot of the time sometimes to quantify, how much pain is costing you, with a lot of these things. So if we're able to justify something, you just have to pick maybe few business scenarios in which, where you're kind of costing a lot of this time and efforts, and then almost try and weigh that up with what you get with some of these advanced features to almost do that kind of, the cost benefit analysis, if you like, to be able to try and work out the investment that will potentially bring you the good ROIs, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same with live licensing too, right? I mean, we haven't really talked about things like, some of the discovery elements of it, insider risk management, and, there's various things in there that can potentially cost you a lot, even from a record management point of view. So those kind of things is more to understand, again, how much would the cost of breach would be to you versus your investment on that. So I think those sort of things, you just want to list them out, to call them out, and at least then understand roughly what are your cost buckets. It doesn't have to be an exact cost, of course, right? You can just say it's either small, medium, or large cost elements to it, but then that will give you an idea roughly how you can get your premium subscriptions or add-ons. And a lot of this sometimes is pay as you go, right? So that's all been documented very clearly for the features that you might use on a pay as you go basis too.
Be good. And also I would say create stories. So you use the contract story,
Yeah.
stories that actually really are going to get to the heart of getting that business case through, what the return of investment they're going to get from it, and then obviously presenting that in a sort of engaging and enthusiastic way that they can get the buy-in for the technology. I know we didn't talk about e-discovery, but we just kind of ran out of time with all the amazing content that you've given us. One question that I'd like to ask. So with the rise of teams and guest access, how do we ensure e-discovery and premium policies aren't leaving massive gaps in our information?
Yeah, I mean, I think the good thing about the guests or even shared channels, for example, in Teams, I mean, all those things, you're able to at least use things, for e-discovery, right? When you're trying to collect your review sets. So you're able to go through those as well. So in that sense, you're closing the gap very much significantly when you're searching for various cases you might have. But at the same time, even for the sensitivity labels, if you want to ensure the guests can't get to some of those items, you got to put those guardrails in place. So, and again, a lot of this, if you like, a lot of these capabilities, they overlap into some of your other well-known problems you might have. So, the solutions for a lot of these problems, some of the scenarios, the gaps you have, they're typically fulfilled by these compliance capabilities, which there's a whole variety of those solutions. And like I say, this information protection, you've got your kind of data lifecycle management for records management, insider risk management. I think probably the key one I would say is also, is looking at the compliance manager as well. So there you're able to actually just run through what we call the assessment of your environment. So it basically looks at your M365 environment, your configurations, whatever the policies you've got, you run through the assessment. And I think there's few of them, well, there's quite a lot based on the ISO standards and various other standards too. I think the new one is the AI assessment. That covers, I think, something like 3 or 4 different standards, including the one from the EU. So you run that and it will tell you exactly, what your environment is good in terms of the score wise, and you can make improvements. And it could be maybe that, say, you haven't got good identity covered in there as well, anything like that. So it will say, those are the things you might want to implement, and it tells you in a clear language what that is, how you do it, gives you a link, and you kind of work through your assessment there. So there's a lot of things that will help you close the gap for your external users or guests accessing the environment.
Fantastic piece of advice there. So I think that's sensational. Last question. So if you were starting as an information entrepreneur within an organization, where would you tell them to head first to understand the Microsoft 365 stack? What app would you master?
Yeah, learning, for me it's the learning, right? Learning never stops. And I would say, I mean, again, if you're using various cloud technologies and so forth, it helps to just understand at a high level what are the technologies your organization is using, what are those capabilities, and then be able to try and at least understand how you can go about formulating your learning plan, right? So there are various resources on Microsoft Learn, which you can create yourself the plan and then work through that. And there's various ready-made learning paths as well, so you can actually go through some of those learning courses. And I think, again, you got various certifications, credentials, scenario-based kind of, interactive testing that goes on. So a lot of that kind of comes in that learning bucket. But also speak to your peers in the industry. If you're not visiting any conferences or any events, visit them. Have those questions out there. Come to us, or for example, Leadership Through Data. Where we can sort of give you a bit of a landscape view around what's going on. But yeah, all those things are very much in action, because a lot of those technologies we work with, they're constantly evolving and updating all the time. So even I'm learning every day something. So it's a good thing.
Amazing. And how can listeners reach out to Chirag?
Very easy. I'm on LinkedIn. Search me up on Tech Chirag, or I've got a new short URL. I think it's on Linktree and /Tech Chirag. But otherwise, yeah, absolutely. I would love to help you out where I can within my time that I can, which I get very little spare time these days.
So I'm really grateful today. I'm sorry we couldn't cover everything.
No, it's been great. No, I think
short
thanks for
podcast
having
time.
me. Thanks for having me, Jackie.
Absolutely sensational. Thank you so much, Chirag, for your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Journals of the Information Entrepreneur with me, Jacqueline Stockwell. I hope you found this episode inspiring and helpful and have some takeaway tips that can be useful to you. If you liked this episode, please like, review and share it with your friends. Your support helps us reach more information leaders to stay inspired and listen to great content. Want to test out your strengths and weaknesses and measure it against our Empower framework? Please complete the scorecard. It's a great way to improve and evaluate your skills. You can find the scorecard at the end of the description of this podcast. Stay tuned for a new podcast every Thursday, and remember to be bold, be brave and be beautiful.